when we discussed the emergence of broadcasting, radio, television, in the Western world, that how much the expectations were at that time that radio particularly, later television, would break the monopolistic media culture that had emerged during the giant newspaper industries. That was, for example, assumption by Walter Ong, the famous speech and communication researcher, secondary orality and so forth. Ong believed that when the radio comes, it breaks the monopoly of newspapers in the media field. But he didn't understand that, after all, radio and television created other type of monopolies. It didn't break the monopolistic nature of the media, it created new types of monopolies. Now with the internet and the new technology, it's assumed that because internet is, quotation mark, free, it breaks monopolistic trends. And the tendency now is surprisingly the opposite. It has created, of course, lots of freedoms, but in the field of professional journalism or media, it has not really proved alternative to the established professional news media, and that's why they are very much on the defense. They are trying what is the mainstream media? How do we define mainstream media? And what is the alternative media? These are now on the agenda. That is internet type of services. Are they bringing more freedom and more alternative approaches to world news than the traditional media? I'm saying this because what happens in Europe is very much following what has happened in America. And we are very much following the same thinking in media literacy. Media literacy was not developed in Europe, it was developed in the United States, it was brought to Europe, and now the content of media literacy is no more the thing that it will be a means to promote intercultural understanding, promote dialogue and literacies to communicate. It's now seen more as a means of resisting or promoting propagandistic communication. For example, this morning, Finland's leading newspaper, Helsingin Sanomat, is a mainstream media in Finland, had a whole page news about how much Russian propaganda is influencing Western, European and Western media, Western public, and how little resources organizations like European Union has to resist Russian propaganda. So this is now the political debate. I'm not taking a position and I'm not analyzing this debate. It's political science, it's interesting. My only question is that if this is not really the concern of European Union, that it has to send instructions how the media should discuss European issues in order not to let Russian or other interference into the debate, it must be very weak, because the problems are created by European Union itself. The Russians, of course, use these conflicts and contradictions as much as they can. That is part of the propaganda forum. But to start that we have to defend something like European Union or Western values and not criticize them is against my ethics. And I wanted to show you, I follow my approach is I'm following the philosophy of Robert Merton, who is was one of the leading theoretical foundations of sociology and sociological knowledge in the world, in the Western world. And his definition of sociology or science, and this includes also, for example, what I'm talking here about, whatever issue, media in Europe, media in Russia, media in China, I follow these ethical principles of what is critical science and research. I'm not accepting any control or order or instructions from outside. We are in a university, and we should be autonomous in deciding and find in our search for truth, which comes out of the discussion and debate. The same goes in my ideal for media. But these are the four criteria that are common. First of all, scientific research can be characterized, and strange enough, he used the word communism, that science is common to everybody. It's nobody's property. Nobody can demand intellectual property for scientific knowledge. But this word communism in science, even though it was used, and you have to remember he presented the views in 1942, it was denied because a Cold War communism was a word that could not be accepted for the political reality, and the word that was used by intellectuals and academia in the Cold War period was communitarian. So it was replaced by the word that science is communitarian. It means that it should be. But it basically, the idea was communist, that it's nobody's property, because that is the difference for free scientific theory and knowledge, that we share everything. It's a common property for humankind and mankind. The second, universalism, that it could not be, it should be also applied to all parts of the world. So we cannot think that the scientific recovery, scientific knowledge is somehow only reflecting one part of the world, not the whole universe. This is a complicated issue, because if you go to issues like human rights, are they universal or are they somehow culturally loaded? This can be discussed, but basically the reason that we have university classes like this, that you come from different parts of the world, the knowledge should be universally relevant. And thirdly, disinterestedness, it meaning that we are not representing any vested interest in the free academic research, and I would compare it to free media. Free media, why should they are not spokesmen of any particular interest? And that goes very much to the debate on the mainstream media and concentration on the media, because if the ownership of the media is biased, does it bring with itself that it also reflects the owner's interest? It's not telling false or fake news, but it tells biased, distorted news favoring certain interests of the owner's interest, be it the oil business or be it other industrial or corporate or financial, whatever interest. So the ownership factor in the media is essential, but also in science, that we have too many universities and more public institutions are replaced by private. In your countries as well, many countries, that private institutes replace public, and it's sometimes so that public services, public universities are worse, they are bad, and private are better, but you have to analyze also what are the interests behind the so-called private or other institutions, what kind of knowledge do they promote? And we are very much in a crisis of higher education also, because of not knowing for sure what are the interests behind of financing organizations, funding organizations, or universities. And the old type of public service universities with freedom of research are on the defense. Again, here America offers both. It has the traditional freedom, but it also has very many private. The private could be also religious, or they could be ideological. What is an Islamic university? What is a Catholic university? And so forth. But the fourth one that is characteristic from Robert Merton, and I like it a lot, to follow organized skepticism. This is important in media, but it's also important in our academic scholarly work. We do not trust that we have the final truth, that we organize critique against everything, including our own teaching. That is why the old type of a seminar, where you have opponent and you have a defender of a thesis, is a good example. What does it mean in practice? It means that you present a thesis or you present a paper, but we have organized a skilled or professional opponent, examiner opponent, and throughout this dialogue or debate, the truth is crystallized and perhaps, if not achieved, at least can be approached more healthy and sustainable way. So the organized skepticism is academic criteria for critical thinking in the media. This would mean today's situation, in my interpretation, that we should have alternative media. We should have more than one dominant and one mainstream media. This is my view, that if we don't have the dominant media, hardly represents all the views existing in the world. A good example could be the climate change, or information about sustainable development regarding natural realities. Who is providing what kind of information and how much debate? What is the truth after all? The concepts that I'm approaching after this more general view is that what do we mean by alternative media, social media, and what is fake news, and what is the truth in this debate, and is there such a thing? I want to show, and we can discuss, that most of the new players in the global media are not claiming that they are bringing the better truth, or they are bringing the correct information, but they are blaming that the dominant news media are not looking at the world in a balanced way. So let me begin by going back to the emergence of real-time television journalism, and in a way going backwards to 90s, when the situation, information technology and the media structure changed fundamentally. It was a first change. The second came then when we had social media and internet applications 20 years later, or 15 years later. But this was already a big change. The change that suddenly war and conflicts were no more out there somewhere. They were in the living rooms, bedrooms of homes, brought by television. CNN grew as a world medium, perhaps the leading medium at that time, because it had the best facilities and it was better prepared for the situation than others. The Gulf War was very complicated. The media was at war. It was on the front. It was not somewhere behind analyzing things. It was in the front for the first time. And there were a lot of studies. I'm not going to them in detail. This was one of them that was necessary for the American public to overcome the Vietnam syndrome. And the research findings were quite convincing that that the television did not distance people from the action of war. It brought people into the middle of the war, even though it was not CNN's war. It was still war of the armed forces, so part of the conflict. I could mention some of the manipulative things using the manipulated individuals, creating the emotional feelings. It happened then, it happened later, it happened in Aleppo things, that children and suffering people. But if you look at the, I open for a minute this old example how it looked like when war was brought into I couldn't get the voice now somehow. I don't know, but if even without the voice, you can see that the television, it was not very analytic. It only showed there's a lot of bombing, a lot of shooting, a lot of killing and action. And this was news. And this was dominating news in the 1990s for warfare and media. And it is still dominating. Images people get from certain parts of the world, Middle East particularly, but also Africa, is more or less killing, fighting machines and so forth. And some of the intellectuals in Europe, like Hans Magnus Enzensberger, a German scribent and author at that time already in the 90s, he was very critical of this development in the Western media culture. He wrote mainly in Der Spiegel in German. This is the English summary of his articles, which he published as a kind of booklet. But his views were very interesting. That he already in 1994, that if we go backwards in history, when we had conflict in a culture like Western culture, that was rumors and legends. But now the media is proud that it goes there where the killing is. And the reporters are no longer interested, and their duty is no more to inform, but they make it clear who is who and what is what, while the commentator supplies the tone of outrage. The emotional outrage of things was very strong. And that's why Enzensberger critique, as one of the intellectuals, was very, very strong against the television. He said that television is the most corrupt of all media. It has created atmosphere that is against the whole morality of human information flow. In France, Ignacio Ramonet, who has written a lot and is known widely, he was also very, very critical against the changes that took place at that time. That the whole concept of truthfulness is disappearing, and the concept of information has changed. It's more or less that something is happening, and something must be done right there and now. So it was not only television, but the media changed radically. And in the analysis of visual culture, that of course there were terrible images in Western awareness already from Napoleon Wars and many other Guernica attacks by the German planes in '37, but they came in a way with a period of time, so that was not immediate and real time. Now it is, the whole event is interpreted while we are watching. So the interpreters and participants already give the interpretation, as if we knew what is happening, and action follows, even though we do not know for sure what has happened. That's why the modern media situation allows very much manipulators to provoke event or accident, event and make action to utilize the manipulated or provoked action for political purposes, because the news media is such that everything must be done immediately. Western world and Western Americans and Western Europeans think that they are doing nasty things so effectively, and is combined with Russian action elsewhere in the military field, in the energy field, and then the British think that it is professionally, not ethically right. They don't follow the same professional norms as the BBC or the Western, that it has to be blamed. I think it is little bit, not little bit, but it is exaggerated and wrong, because Russian propaganda abroad, of course, is very different from say the propaganda of Americans or the British, because of different reasons. And I didn't analyze at all the domestic media. If you go to see what is a domestic media in the United States, what is a domestic media in Russia, of course in Russia people trust television. There's no really opposition views on television. But in America also the domestic view of the media is very much different, and the conflicts are very much different from what is reflected internationally. I'm speaking about international propaganda. The domestic issues are then separate, and there the Russian television has been very effective in taking up, particularly because they have services in different regions. RT has services Russian, it has UK, it has Arabic, it has Spanish. Like to the BBC or like to the others, they have many language services. They are very cleverly taking up American debate, and many of the journalists were American journalists. Larry King, one of the former star of CNN, is working for RT, and many other discussions are top-level American journalists. They are doing it very skillfully, and it has an intellectual impact, and this is irritating Americans, that somebody is interfering into their internal affairs so well. This is my interpretation. And the Russians are using the maximum they can, all the kind of controversies that exist inside America, inside Europe, or outside Russia, and they try to promote their own view as much as they can. But so do the others. I don't know if I gave a fair, balanced view. It's different to say. You have to analyze. But what I can present is this: is the report from the Munich Security Conference earlier this year, where the Western powers were analyzing what is a budget and what are the subscriptions of YouTube services in the world. And the analysis was that the largest budget in the media is by China, the public international broadcast. So this means that this is again the government, the public media, BBC, RT, France and Germany. RT is not that big in funding public, it's smaller than the BBC, but this was the conclusion of the Western security authorities. And then if you look at the YouTube subscriptions, that RT is so widely used, and the RT itself is very proud that it has been used so widely, more than Deutsche Welle or Chinese or the BBC. So this was regarded as a threat or alarming by the Western, that Russia is so strong in its influence, and the American report or the security report gave this information about the findings of media the role of RT in the United States, that YouTube viewers is so big, YouTube subscriptions so big, and even not so much in Twitter and Facebook, but this is alarming to the American concern and the security concern, and they draw the conclusion that RT is somehow has to be controlled, and now they are controlling. Facebook is providing a service that it gives the users a warning if you have been favoring Russian originated news. It warns that you should not be so trusting so much. So this is the media war at worst at the moment. I take this material from Southern Illinois University, Professor Leo Gehr. He's a retired professor of broadcasting, and he gave this material to me some months ago, just to show how he and the American academic see the problem of fake news and American news. First of all, their thinking is that mainstream media is mainstream media, but it is essential to the American democracy, and it's now under attack. These are the American mainstream media. You can see mainstream media in your country as well. And he says, yes, mainstream media have opinion, have viewpoints, slant, bias, partiality, but so do many reporters. But reporters pursue stories. So what is then mainstream media? His analysis is that it is the so-called fourth estate, watchdog of government, that belongs to American democracy, that the media, mainstream media, has trained reporters, editors, publishers responsible. It's different from fake media who have follow not professional rules. Alternative media, in American understanding, is media that are watching the watchers, monitoring, assessing, criticizing, challenging. And what is a social media? It is all kind of communication between friends, regardless of accuracy. It's kind of everybody's citizen journalism, and very susceptible to fake news. And this is a list, American situation list of what are the mainstream media: Comcast, Disney, News Corporation, Time Warner, Viacom, CBS. And then alternative media. What could be the alternative? Wikipedia, YouTube, and so forth. And we come to the research field that in Leo Gehr's analysis, the issue has become, we return to the basic concepts of communication research that were already emerged in the Cold War period and before. Cognitive dissonance. It is a kind of mental stress that is experienced when somebody is confronted with new information that contradicts between beliefs, ideas, and values. This is a known psychological fact that we want to avoid conflicting views. We want to see the world through the same eyes, same glasses as we are used to do. It's more safe, more easy, more comfortable, and we want to avoid cognitive dissonance of any kind. And in media behavior, we have known this as selective processes. Psychological research for a long time has shown us that we follow certain psychological processes when we deal with the media. It means that the psychological processes are, first of all, we have selective exposure. I mean, people expose themselves selectively. You choose in advance, or anyway you choose what paper, what broadcaster, what social media, what Twitter you want to follow. That's a selective exposure. You don't even want to be exposed by opposing views. And in my analysis, this is the first situation that we already we isolate, we close exposing to other cultural or civilizational world. We are not interested to look or to follow how the world is interpreted by somebody who is representing a very basic different culture. So the selective exposure is first. But the selective exposure is only one stage. The second stage is selective attention. Even though we might watch or we might read or we might listen to this different points of view or different approaches, we observe selectively. Our attention is selective. We see what we want to see. This is again very known fact in the propaganda war or the Cold War. At that time, for example, when you were fully convinced that that side is full of criminals or wrong, you saw what you wanted to see. And even traveling is not very reliable means of becoming informed, because when you travel, you determine in advance what you expect and what you want to see there. You want to see the starving, poor people when you go to Central Africa, and you definitely will see them. You might also like to see, I know that they have made success in applying newest technology in some medical experiments, and you will see those experiments when you want to see that, even though not necessarily with a very specific focus, but you see what you want to see. So seeing is selective, hearing is selective, attention is selective, and to break that selective attention is difficult. But it's not only this, that selective exposure, selective attention, but it is also selective memory. Even though you are forced or you by accident have to see or hear or read things that you did not intend to see or hear, you forget if it's not fitting to your preconceived ideological cultural perception. So you remember what you want to remember. The memory is built so that it selects what to remember. I'm now speaking about the media. Of course, it can be extended to the human behavior as a whole, that you remember good things. Like the older you become, the more you forget the bad things in your life normally. It's a general behavior that the selective processes. But this cognitive dissonance in a media situation that we have now, that you are theoretically, you can be exposed to contradictory messages. People do not want to have that situation. It's not very balanced. It's not very confirming, because it creates a need of making a decision of believing something and not believing something else. And this cognitive dissonance is a kind of mental stage that we have to deal with. And if I think about our interest, if you think about the intercultural communication, there are means of overcoming this dissonance, that we accept, we develop kind of open mental mapping, that we are not closed. The new media is very much building particularly this kind of Facebook services and all the algorithms that follow your media behavior and provide you with material that you already have searched before. So it's self-confirming. And it's the confirmation bias that Leo Gehr, for example, brings forward, that in the internet, people aggregate with like-minded others. You join groups, you create societies of like-minded peoples, and you read and pass along information that confirms the established opinions. And you believe that you have the so-called truth. Well, the examples, right-wing people or left-wing people, but Leo Gehr believes that this is one of the reasons that creates and divides Americans, that people close conflicting information channels. In fact, this was President Obama, when he left his office, he spoke about the bubble. They are building a comfortable shelters to protect ourselves from dissenting voices and views. I'm not defending his view or criticizing it, but it's a fact that if you want to avoid other views, you definitely close your mind for dialogue and communication. Is that the goal? Is a problem.